Mitchell Davenport had always believed that strength was something you carried quietly. Not the loud, attention-seeking kind. Not the kind that announced itself in rooms or demanded recognition. But the kind that lived in your spine, straightening it when the world tried to bend you. The kind that made you walk into rooms where you were underestimated and leave them remembered. At 27, Mitchell had mastered that kind of strength. She stood in the mirror of her Manhattan apartment that morning, fingers smoothing down the front of her tailored cream blouse, her reflection calm but her chest tight with an anxiety she had never learned to name. Her dark curls were pulled into a low, elegant bun. Her makeup minimal, soft brown eyeshadow, nude gloss. Nothing that screamed for attention. She didn't need to scream. Mitchell had grown up wealthy, educated, surrounded by polished dinners and polite smiles. Her father, Samuel Davenport, was a respected businessman whose name once opened doors across continents. Her mother had been warmth and grace, gone too soon, leaving Mitchell an only child far earlier than she was ready for. After her mother's death, Mitchell became her father's anchor, and now she was about to lose him too. The phone call had come 3 nights earlier. Samuel's voice had sounded wrong, thin, strained, like a man speaking through water. The Korean partnership collapsed, he had said. Funds frozen. Lawsuits pending. Everything is gone, Mitchell. She remembered sitting on the edge of her bed afterward, staring at nothing, her hands shaking as if her body understood the danger before her mind did. By the next morning, she had flown home. Now she stood in his old office, once a symbol of power, now stripped bare. The shelves were empty, the desk cleared, the silence heavy enough to suffocate. Her father sat in a chair that looked too big for him now. He had aged 10 years in 3 weeks. "Daddy," Mitchell said softly, kneeling in front of him. "Look at me." He didn't. "They're taking the house," he whispered. "The accounts are frozen. I called everyone. No one is returning my calls." Mitchell reached for his hands. They were cold. "You're not alone," she said, her voice steady even as her heart cracked. "I'll fix this." He laughed bitterly. "You can't fix this." "Yes," she said firmly. "I can." That was when she thought of Min-Jae. She hadn't seen Min-Jae Kang in almost 10 years, but she remembered him vividly. The Kang family had been their business partners when Mitchell was younger. Frequent dinners, formal gatherings, polite conversations that never quite crossed into warmth. Min-Jae had been older, quieter, already carrying himself like a man who knew he would inherit power. He had always watched her, not in an obvious way, not in a way that made her uncomfortable, just aware. She had never given him much thought, and that, it seemed, was the problem. Min-Jae Kang was now the CEO of Kang Global Holdings, a man whose approval could save or destroy what remained of her father's legacy. And Mitchell was going to ask him for help. The Kang Global building rose like a monument to precision, steel, glass, and cold confidence. Mitchell walked through its doors with measured steps, her heels echoing softly against marble floors. She refused to look intimidated. The receptionist glanced up. "Miss Davenport, Mr. Kang is expecting you." Of course he was. The elevator ride was silent, ascending into power. When the doors opened, Mitchell was greeted by floor-to-ceiling windows and a city laid out beneath them like a map he already owned. Min-Jae stood near the window, his back to her. Even from behind, he was unmistakable. Tall, broad-shouldered, built like a man who didn't waste time in gyms but still carried discipline in his frame. His suit was dark, tailored to perfection, his posture unyielding. He turned slowly. Time did something strange then. Mitchell felt it. Not attraction exactly, but awareness. Min-Jae had grown into his power. His face was sharp, masculine, his gaze dark and unreadable. There was no warmth in his eyes, only assessment. "Mitchell," he said calmly. "Min-Jae." He studied her without apology. "You look exactly the same." She lifted her chin. "You don't." A corner of his mouth twitched. "Sit." She did. He folded his hands on the desk. "I know why you're here. I'm sure you do. Your father's deal collapsed because he ignored the revised terms. That deal destroyed him, Mitchell said, her voice tightening. You could have stopped it. I could have, Min-Jae agreed. But he didn't listen. She leaned forward. Then listen to me. Silence stretched between them. You were always confident, Min-Jae said. Even when you were younger. You never looked at me. Mitchell frowned. This isn't personal. He smiled faintly. Everything is personal. Her stomach tightened. I need your help, she said. Not for myself. For my father. Min-Jae's gaze sharpened. And what are you willing to offer? She hesitated. Whatever is reasonable. That was when he stood. Min-Jae stepped closer, invading her space without touching her. You always thought I wasn't good enough for you, he said quietly. You never once looked my way. Mitchell stiffened. That has nothing to do with why I'm here. It has everything to do with it, he replied. You grew up confident, untouchable, selective. You looked at men the way investors look at risks, briefly, then dismissed them. That's not true, she said, her voice firm though her heart was racing. I simply knew what I wanted. And I wasn't it, he finished. She met his gaze without flinching. This isn't personal, Min-Jae. My father is suffering. I came to you because you can help. Yes, he said calmly. I can. Hope flickered in her chest. But help, he continued, comes at a price. Her stomach tightened. Name it. His eyes darkened, not with lust, but with something colder. Controlled. You, he said. The word landed between them like a weapon. Mitchell stood abruptly. You're asking me to trade my body. I'm asking you to give me what you denied me all those years, he replied evenly. One night. Your choice. No force. No deception. Her hands trembled, though she kept them at her sides. I'm not that kind of woman. I know, he said softly. That's exactly why I asked. The room felt suddenly smaller. You think this is a game, she whispered. No, he said. I think this is honesty. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. I won't do this, she said. Min-Jae stepped back, his face once again unreadable. Then your father's fate remains unchanged. Silence swallowed them. Mitchell turned and walked out, each step heavier than the last. That night, she sat beside her father's hospital bed, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest. He looked smaller, fragile, a man once powerful now reduced to waiting. Mitchell clasped his hand, pressing it to her forehead. I'll fix this, she whispered. I promise. Across the city, Min-Jae Kang stood alone in his penthouse, staring out at the lights below. He told himself he felt nothing, but her face, calm, proud, unbroken, refused to leave his mind. And he did not yet know that the woman he thought he understood would undo him completely. Mitchell had always believed that desperation had a sound. It was quiet. It wasn't screaming or crying or collapsing to the floor the way movies made it seem. Desperation was the silence after you had exhausted every option. The pause after every door had closed. The stillness that settled in your chest when hope stopped answering your calls. She learned that truth over the next 2 weeks. She called banks first, old contacts, polite voices that once welcomed her father's name with enthusiasm. Now they spoke in rehearsed sympathy, citing policy, regulations, frozen assets. She met lawyers who flipped through documents with furrowed brows and slow headshakes. Former partners avoided eye contact, pretending not to see her messages, not to recognize the urgency beneath her calm tone. Every path led back to the same wall. Kang Global Holdings. And the man who sat at its center. Min-Jae Kang. Mitchell tried not to think of him. She told herself she hated him. His arrogance, his cruel composure, the way he had looked at her as if she were both a memory and a challenge. But hatred required energy, and she was running out of that too. Her father's condition worsened. The doctor spoke in cautious phrases: stress-induced collapse, major depressive episode, monitoring required. Mitchell heard what they didn't say. He had almost given up. One night, as rain traced thin lines down the hospital window, Samuel finally spoke the words that shattered her. "I failed you," he whispered. Mitchell looked up from the chair beside his bed. "No, you didn't. I built everything for you," he continued, eyes hollow. "And now I have nothing to leave behind. Your mother would." His voice broke. "She would be ashamed of me." Mitchell stood abruptly, gripping the bed rail. "Don't say that." Tears slid silently down his temples. "You should leave me, Mitchell. Start your life. Don't ruin yourself trying to save an old man." That night, Mitchell cried for the first time since her mother's funeral. Not loudly, silently, in the bathroom with the door locked, her hands pressed to her mouth as her body shook with everything she had been holding back. Fear, rage, helplessness, and beneath it all, a terrible question she was afraid to answer. How much are you willing to lose to save him? Min-Jae watched the city from his office long after his staff had gone home. He told himself he was waiting on reports, that he was reviewing numbers, that Mitchell Adebayo was just another unresolved negotiation. But his mind betrayed him. He remembered her eyes when she stood up from his desk, steady, burning, refusing to beg. He remembered the way she walked out, spine straight, dignity intact. Most women would have stayed. Most would have negotiated. Mitchell hadn't. That unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Min-Jae had always been selective. Not because he lacked options, he had more than he could count, but because he distrusted affection that came too easily. Women wanted his name, his power, his future. He gave them moments, never permanence. But Mitchell had never wanted him. And that truth pressed against his pride like a bruise. His phone vibrated. Unknown number. He answered without looking. "Kang." There was a pause. A breath. "Min-Jae," Mitchell said. His chest tightened. "Yes. I need to see you." Silence stretched between them again, heavy with everything unsaid. "When?" he asked. "Tonight." He checked his watch. "Come." Mitchell stood outside Kang Global for several minutes before going in. The building looked different at night, less imposing, more isolated. The reflection in the glass showed a woman she barely recognized. Her shoulders were squared, her face composed, but her eyes carried something new. Resolve. Min-Jae was waiting when she entered his office. No desk between them this time. She didn't sit. "I've tried everything," she said simply. "There's no one else." He studied her carefully. And I won't beg," she continued. "But I'll listen." Something shifted in his expression. Not victory, not satisfaction, but tension. "You're proud," he said. "That hasn't changed. Neither has my love for my father." Min-Jae walked to the window, his back to her. "Do you know how many times men like him come to me? Ruined, broken, expecting mercy." "I'm not asking for mercy," Mitchell said. "I'm asking for fairness." He turned. "Fairness doesn't exist in business." "Then call it humanity." He laughed softly, without humor. "You always were stubborn." "And you," she replied, "always confuse control with strength." The words struck deeper than she intended. Min-Jae stepped closer, stopping just short of touching her. "If you walk away again," he said quietly, "there will be no third meeting." "I know." Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure he could hear it. "I'll agree," she said. The air between them froze. "To your condition," she continued, voice steady despite the storm inside her. "But understand this, what you take, you will never own." His jaw tightened. "You think I want ownership?" he asked. "I think you want to win." Silence. "Tomorrow," he said finally, "come to my penthouse." She nodded once. As she turned to leave, Min-Jae spoke again. "Mitchell." She paused but didn't look back. "This changes everything." She closed her eyes briefly. "It already has." That night, neither of them slept. Mitchell lay awake staring at the ceiling, her mind cycling through memories of her mother, her childhood, the future she once imagined. She told herself she was making a choice, not being forced, not being broken. Still, her hands trembled. Across the city, Min-Jae stood under a cold shower, water sliding down his skin as if it could wash away the unease twisting in his chest. He told himself this was simple, transactional, but for the first time in his life he wasn't certain. And that frightened him. Mitchell arrived at Min-Jae's penthouse just after dusk. The city below glowed in fragments of gold and white, a living constellation stretching endlessly in every direction. She stood before the door longer than necessary, her fingers curled into her palm, steadying her breath. She was not afraid, at least that was what she told herself. Fear implied weakness. This was resolve. When the door opened, Min-Jae stood there in a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled back, dark hair slightly undone in a way she had never seen before. He looked less like a CEO and more like a man. Still controlled, still powerful, but stripped of the armor he wore in boardrooms. "You're on time," he said. "I always am." He stepped aside to let her in. The penthouse was minimalist but warm. Dark wood floors, clean lines, soft lighting that erased the sharpness of the glass walls. It didn't feel like a place meant for indulgence. It felt solitary. Min-Jae poured 2 glasses of water, handing her one. "Drink. You'll need it." She accepted it without comment. Silence stretched between them again, thick and unbearable. "I want to be clear," Mitchell said finally. "I am here by choice, but I am not weak." He met her gaze. "I never thought you were." "Good." She set the glass down. "When this is over, my father walks free. His name cleared, his accounts restored." Min-Jae nodded. "It's already in motion." Her chest tightened despite herself. "Thank you." The words surprised them both. He studied her for a long moment, then said quietly, "You can still walk away." Mitchell laughed softly. "Now you say that?" "Yes," he replied. "Because now I need to know you're certain." She stepped closer. "I've never been more certain of anything." Something unreadable flickered across his face. Later, in the bedroom, the air felt heavier, charged with something neither of them had named. Mitchell stood near the bed, her fingers trembling as she unbuttoned her blouse slowly, deliberately. There was no seduction in her movements, only honesty. Min-Jae watched her as if witnessing something sacred. "Mitchell," he said, his voice lower now, "if you want me to stop." "I don't," she interrupted. "Just don't treat this lightly." "I won't." That was a promise. When he touched her, it was careful at first, hesitant in a way that surprised her. Min-Jae had always been confident, commanding. But now his hands shook slightly, as if something about her presence demanded reverence. And then, he realized, the shift was immediate. Her stillness, the tension beneath her composure, the way her breath caught, not in anticipation but in fear she was refusing to voice. Min-Jae froze. "Mitchell," he said sharply, pulling back just enough to look at her. "Have you ever?" She closed her eyes. Silence answered him before she did. "No," she whispered. The world tilted. Min-Jae stepped back as if struck. "You're?" His voice failed him. "Yes, at 27. For a moment he couldn't breathe. Everything he thought he knew about her, about women like her, collapsed in an instant. Pride, assumptions, his own cruel certainty. "You should have told me," he said hoarsely. She met his gaze, pain flashing through her eyes. "You never asked." Guilt slammed into him with brutal force. "I thought," he stopped. There was no justification strong enough to survive the truth. Mitchell's voice trembled despite her effort to control it. "If you want to stop now, do it. But don't look at me like I'm broken." Min-Jae's hands dropped to his sides. "I'm not stopping," he said. "But I'm no longer the same man who made that demand." He moved slowly, deliberately now, not to take but to protect. Every touch was gentler, every breath measured. Mitchell clung to him, not in desperation, but in surrender, the kind that comes only when trust replaces fear. When it was over, Mitchell lay beside him, staring at the ceiling, tears sliding silently into her hair. Min-Jae turned toward her. "I didn't know," he said again. "And I should have." She swallowed. What changes now? Everything he wanted to say. Instead, he said, "Your father will be safe. I give you my word." She turned to face him, searching his expression. And us? There it was. The question he hadn't prepared for. I don't know, he admitted quietly. But I know I can't pretend this didn't matter. Mitchell nodded, exhaustion finally claiming her. Min-Jae watched her fall asleep, her face peaceful despite the storm she had walked through. For the first time in his life, Min-Jae Kang felt shame. And for the first time, love frightened him. Morning did not soften what Min-Jae Kang felt. It sharpened it. He woke before the light fully reached the room, his body still, his mind loud. The space beside him was empty, the sheets cold. For a brief, irrational moment, he thought she had disappeared like a dream. But then he noticed it. The absence wasn't sudden. It was intentional. Mitchell had left quietly, without drama, without confrontation, without gratitude. That unsettled him far more than anger would have. He sat up, running a hand through his hair, his chest tight in a way he did not recognize. He had spent his life controlling outcomes, people, negotiations, desires, yet last night had stripped him of something he didn't know he relied on. Certainty. He had gone into that night believing he was taking something owed to him. He woke up realizing he had been entrusted with something priceless. And that realization crushed him. Mitchell returned to her life like a woman reclaiming stolen ground. She visited her father that morning and found him sitting upright, lucid, speaking with a lawyer whose presence confirmed what she had already suspected. Min-Jae had kept his word. The business was stabilized, the damage contained, the collapse reversed. Her father held her hands, eyes wet with relief. "You saved me," he whispered. Mitchell smiled softly. "You saved yourself. I just reminded you how." She did not tell him what it cost. Some things were not meant to be repaid with gratitude. Min-Jae sent flowers. Mitchell returned them. He sent a message. She did not reply. He waited 2 days before sending another, not demanding, not entitled. "I want to apologize, not as a CEO, as a man." She read it, then locked her phone and went on with her day. Mitchell did not hate him, but she refused to let confusion masquerade as forgiveness. She had not given herself in pleasure. She had not given herself in expectation. And she would not give herself again out of guilt. Min-Jae had never chased a woman. He had never needed to. But Mitchell was not retreating out of strategy or pride. She was retreating out of self-respect, and that terrified him. He started small. He sent a handwritten apology to her father. No branding, no lawyers, no conditions. Then another note to Mitchell delivered once, not repeated. "I wronged you. I do not expect absolution, but I will live differently because of you." She read it twice, then set it aside. Weeks passed. Min-Jae changed. Not performatively, quietly. He stepped back from ruthless acquisitions. He corrected executives who spoke carelessly about power. He found himself replaying her voice. Not the night itself, but her composure, her refusal to be reduced. For the first time, he wanted to be worthy without being watched. That realization frightened him more than rejection. When Mitchell finally agreed to meet him, it was brief and guarded. Public place. Daylight. Distance. Min-Jae stood when she approached, not out of courtesy, but reverence. "I'm not here to talk about us," she said calmly. "I know," he replied. "I'm here because I need to say something without asking for anything." She folded her arms. "Then say it." "I was wrong," he said simply, "and no explanation will ever make it right." She studied his face, searching for manipulation. Found none. "I don't forgive easily," she said. "I'm not asking you to. I won't be your redemption story." "I don't want redemption," he replied. "I want accountability." Silence stretched between them. "You may never choose me," he continued, "but I will spend whatever time I have becoming someone who never mistakes access for entitlement again." Mitchell stood. "I believe actions," she said, "not words." "I know." She walked away, and for the first time in his life, Min-Jae Kang did not feel rejected. He felt challenged. That night, Mitchell lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She did not miss him, But she could not deny that something was changing. Not in her heart yet, but in her perception. Min-Jae was no longer pursuing possession. He was pursuing permission. And when, if she ever gave it, it would be because he had earned her trust, not claimed her vulnerability. Min-Jae Kang had negotiated billion-dollar mergers in hostile rooms filled with men who wanted him to blink first. Waiting had never been part of his skill set. Yet here he was learning it, not because he had to, but because Mitchell Davenport had left him no other honorable choice. He did not call her every day. That was the first discipline. He had learned, quickly, that silence could be respectful or manipulative depending on intention. So he chose intention carefully. He allowed space without disappearing, presence without pressure. Once a week he sent something small, not gifts, thoughtfulness. A book she had once mentioned loving as a teenager, shipped without a note. An article about African American women in global finance, bookmarked with one sentence highlighted. A short message sent once, never repeated. I saw this and thought of you. Mitchell noticed. She pretended she didn't. Her life, meanwhile, had steadied. Her father regained strength, both physically and emotionally. Their home felt alive again. Not wealthy, not extravagant, but grounded. Samuel laughed more, ate better, planned again. One evening, as they shared tea on the balcony, he looked at her carefully. You've been carrying something heavy, he said. Mitchell smiled faintly. I'm putting it down. He nodded, as if he understood more than she said. The first time Min-Jae truly waited was the night he saw her across a room and did not approach. It was a charity gala, one he had been invited to long before Mitchell ever agreed to attend. He arrived late, scanning the room instinctively, then froze. She was there. Mitchell wore deep blue silk, her hair loose, her laughter restrained but real as she spoke to a small group near the bar. She looked free. Min-Jae felt the pull immediately, but he stayed where he was. He watched another man approach her. Polite, curious, clearly interested. Min-Jae felt something sharp twist in his chest. Jealousy. He welcomed it. It meant he was no longer entitled. Mitchell noticed him eventually. Their eyes met. He gave her a small nod. Nothing more. Later that night, she received a single message. I saw you tonight. I hope you enjoyed yourself. She stared at the screen longer than she meant to. Their meetings remained sparse, intentional. When they did speak, it was brief, neutral, honest. Min-Jae never brought up the past unless she did. Never asked for forgiveness. Never implied expectation. Once, over coffee, Mitchell tested him. Why are you still here? She asked calmly. You already kept your word. Min-Jae didn't hesitate. Because I don't want to be the kind of man who walks away after doing the bare minimum. She studied him. And if I never choose you? He met her gaze. Then I'll still be better than I was before I met you. That answer unsettled her. Not because it was impressive, but because it was true. Weeks turned into months. Trust did not arrive loudly. It arrived quietly, in consistency, in restraint, in the absence of pressure. Mitchell began to notice how Min-Jae listened. Not to respond, not to impress, but to understand. She noticed how he respected her silences, how he never touched her without invitation, how he never once referred to that night as anything other than his failure. And that mattered. One evening, as they walked through a park after a charity meeting, Mitchell stopped suddenly. Why didn't you stop that night? She asked, not looking at him. Min-Jae's steps slowed. I should have, he said softly. I didn't see clearly until it was too late. She nodded. That's the truth. I live with it, he added. But I won't let it define how I love, if you ever let me. She turned to face him then. Love is not something I promise easily. I know. And I won't give myself again just because someone wants me. I wouldn't accept it, he replied. Silence fell between them. Not awkward, not heavy. Safe. That night, when Mitchell reached her apartment, she did something she hadn't done before. She texted him first. Thank you for walking me home. Min-Jae stared at the message for a long time before replying. Always. Mitchell lay in bed afterward, phone resting on her chest. She was not in love. Not yet. But the wall she had built around her heart had shifted. Not fallen. Not cracked. But loosened. Min-Jae Kang was no longer chasing her body. He was earning her trust. And for the first time since everything broke, Mitchell allowed herself to wonder, what if waiting was not weakness? What if it was devotion? Trust did not announce itself. It slipped in quietly, disguised as normalcy. Mitchell noticed it first in the smallest moments, the way Min-Jae no longer felt like a presence she had to brace against. The way his name on her phone no longer tightened her chest. The way silence between them no longer demanded explanation. That unsettled her more than fear ever had. Because fear was easy to manage. Comfort was dangerous. They sat across from each other in a quiet cafe, sunlight cutting through tall windows, the city humming beyond the glass. This was the fourth meeting she had agreed to, always public, always measured, always on her terms. Min-Jae had not tried to shorten the distance. He never reached across the table, never lowered his voice to intimacy, never looked at her as if he was waiting for permission she hadn't given. That restraint mattered. "You look tired," he said gently. Mitchell lifted an eyebrow. "You're observing now?" "I've always observed," he replied. "I just used to weaponize it." She huffed softly before she could stop herself. "That might be the most honest thing you've ever said." A corner of his mouth curved. Not triumph, not charm. Relief. Min-Jae was being tested again. Not by circumstance. By patience. Every instinct in him urged acceleration, to define, to clarify, to claim. That was how he had always operated. Control reduced risk. Ambiguity was weakness. But Mitchell existed in ambiguity like a fortress. And if he pushed, he would lose her forever. So he waited. He listened when she spoke about her work, her frustrations, her ambitions that had nothing to do with survival anymore. He asked questions that had no payoff. He accepted boundaries without trying to renegotiate them. Some nights, when he was alone, he hated how much effort it took. Other nights, he hated how much it mattered. Mitchell wrestled with something she hadn't expected. Desire. Not the kind that burned recklessly. The kind that grew. It crept in when she noticed how Min-Jae stepped aside to let others speak. When she caught him correcting a man who dismissed a junior colleague too quickly. When she realized he remembered things she had never emphasized. Not her body. Not that night. Her words. She told herself this meant nothing. Trust did not equal attraction. Respect did not equal affection. And yet, one evening, as they stood outside her apartment building after a late charity meeting, she felt it. The pause. The space where something could happen and didn't. Min-Jae stopped a full step away from her. "Good night, Mitchell." She nodded. "Good night." Neither moved. The air thickened not with tension, but with restraint. She became acutely aware of his presence. Of the way he waited without expectation. Of how easily he could have leaned closer and didn't. That was when it frightened her. Because for the first time she wondered what it would feel like if he did. The past did not stay buried. It never did. Mitchell learned that lesson the hard way when an article resurfaced online. An opinion piece dissecting her father's collapse, speculating on her arrangement with Kang Global. It was vague, cowardly, cruel. She read it once, then again. By the third time, her hands were shaking. The shame wasn't new, but the anger was. Min-Jae saw it on her face the moment she walked into the cafe the next day. "What happened?" he asked. She slid her phone across the table. He read the article in silence. His jaw tightened, not defensively, not with embarrassment, with fury. "This should never have been published," he said quietly. "Don't," she warned. "Don't fix it. Don't control it. I don't want to owe you anything." He met her gaze steadily. "I'm not fixing it for you." "Then why?" "I'm fixing it because it's wrong," he said. "And because I won't stand by while someone uses your pain as leverage." She searched his face for arrogance. Found none. Still, her voice hardened. "This is exactly what I'm afraid of. Power stepping in where I didn't ask." Min-Jae nodded once. "Then tell me what you do want." She hesitated. Then, quietly, I want you to stay, not intervene, not retaliate. Just stay. Something shifted in him. I can do that, he said. And he did. That night, Mitchell lay awake longer than usual. She was not reliving the past. She was confronting the present. Min-Jae Kang was no longer a threat. He was no longer a debt. He was no longer a man demanding access. He was a man choosing restraint. And that was far more dangerous to her heart than force ever could have been. Across the city, Min-Jae stared at the ceiling of his penthouse, hands folded behind his head. He wanted her, not her body, her trust, her choosing, her yes spoken freely without consequence. For the first time in his life, Min-Jae Kang understood that desire without entitlement was not weakness. It was discipline. And discipline, he was learning, might be the truest form of love. Mitchell learned that healing was not linear. Some days, she woke up feeling strong, grounded in the certainty that she had survived, that she had chosen herself even when the cost was unbearable. Other days, the memory of that night returned uninvited, not as pain exactly, but as a question her mind refused to stop asking. Did I lose something? Or did something change me? She hated that question, because it had no clean answer. Min-Jae did not intrude on her thoughts intentionally. That made it worse. If he had pushed, demanded, cornered her emotions the way he once had cornered her circumstances, she could have rejected him easily. Anger was familiar territory. So was distance. But Min-Jae had become careful, deliberate, present without weight, and that unsettled her far more than aggression ever could. They met less frequently now by her choice, not his. When she delayed replying to messages, he did not follow up. When she declined invitations, he did not ask why. Once, after 3 weeks without seeing him, Mitchell realized something that made her chest tighten. She missed him. Not desperately, not romantically. She missed the steadiness of his attention, the way he listened without trying to steer the conversation. The way he did not make her feel like she owed him comfort or reassurance. The way he treated her boundaries as immovable facts, not obstacles. That frightened her, because wanting someone who respected her felt dangerously close to trusting them. Mitchell had spent years believing she understood men. She understood attraction, ambition, ego. She understood how power distorted affection and how generosity often hid expectation. She had watched her mother navigate a marriage built on mutual respect, not possession, and she had carried that model quietly into adulthood. That was why she had remained untouched for so long. Not because she lacked desire, but because she refused to give herself to someone who did not see her as whole before touching her. And now the one man who had violated that principle was also the one learning to honor it. The contradiction made her restless. One evening, Mitchell attended a small dinner hosted by a friend. Intimate, warm, unguarded. Laughter filled the room, wine flowed freely, and for a while, she forgot the weight she carried. Until someone mentioned Min-Jae's name. Isn't Kang Global partnering with your father again? Someone asked casually. The room quieted, not intentionally, but noticeably. Mitchell smiled politely. Yes. And you know Min-Jae personally, right? She nodded. A pause. Not judgment. Curiosity. She hated that too. Later that night, alone in her apartment, the walls felt closer than usual. She replayed the question in her mind. Not the words, but the implication. What are you to him? She didn't know. And that uncertainty gnawed at her. Min-Jae, meanwhile, was learning restraint in a new way. He wanted to reach out, to ask how she was, to check if the article's aftermath had faded, to reassure her that he was still there. But he didn't, because he had finally understood something fundamental. Mitchell did not need him to prove anything. She needed space to decide whether she wanted him at all. That realization cost him sleep. They ran into each other unexpectedly at a gallery opening. No planning. No preparation. Mitchell froze for half a second when she saw him across the room. He was speaking with the curator, posture relaxed, expression open. When he noticed her, he didn't rush over. He waited. She approached him instead. Hi, she said. "Hi," he replied, his voice steady, familiar. They stood there, surrounded by art and conversation, yet strangely alone in their shared awareness. "You look well," he said. "So do you." Silence settled, not awkward, not strained. "Honest. I didn't expect to see you here," she added. "I come sometimes," he said. "It helps me think." She tilted her head. "About business?" "About people," he corrected. That answer stayed with her longer than it should have. As they walked through the gallery together, still not touching, not leaning too close, Mitchell felt the pull again. Not physical, emotional. She found herself wanting to ask questions she had avoided. "What do you feel? Why are you still here? What happens if I let you closer?" She didn't ask any of them. Instead, she said, "I don't know what you expect from me." Min-Jae stopped walking. "I don't expect anything," he said quietly. She turned to face him. "Everyone expects something, even when they say they don't." He met her gaze, unflinching. "Then let me be clear. I don't expect." The distinction landed heavily. Hope could be withdrawn. Expectation demanded fulfillment. Mitchell looked away first. That night, alone again, she sat on her bed and allowed herself something she had been avoiding. She admitted the truth. She was afraid, not of Min-Jae hurting her again, but of him not, of the possibility that he had changed in ways that mattered, of the danger that she might one day look at him and realize she trusted him more than she was ready to admit. Trust would mean vulnerability, and vulnerability would mean risking something she had protected her entire life, her heart. Across the city, Min-Jae stood on his balcony, watching the lights flicker below. He did not feel impatient. He felt reverent. Mitchell Adebayo was not a woman to be won. She was a woman to be chosen by herself. And if that day never came, he knew something else would still remain true. She had already changed him, but he would never ask her to change for him. Not again. The invitation was innocent. That was the dangerous part. Mitchell received it late in the afternoon. A simple message from Min-Jae, sent without preamble or expectation. "There's a small fundraiser tonight. Art education. Public. If you'd like to attend, I'll be there. If not, I understand. No pressure. No follow-up. No assumption." She read it twice, then once more. Mitchell had learned to distrust invitations that arrived wrapped in politeness. But this one didn't feel like a trap. It felt like an open door that would remain open whether she stepped through or not. She surprised herself by replying, "I'll come. For a bit." His response came several minutes later. "I'll see you there. Nothing else." The venue was understated. An old renovated hall with exposed brick, warm lighting, soft music humming beneath quiet conversation. Mitchell arrived alone, dressed simply, deliberately avoiding anything that felt like armor. She spotted Min-Jae across the room almost immediately. He was speaking with a small group, posture relaxed, jacket off, sleeves rolled up. He looked human, not the untouchable executive she had once faced across a desk. Not the man from that night, just a man. When their eyes met, he didn't cross the room. He waited. Again. Mitchell walked toward him, feeling the subtle shift inside herself. The awareness, the pull, the caution braided together. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said when she reached him. "I almost didn't," she replied honestly. "I'm glad you did." No emphasis. No relief disguised as charm. Just truth. They moved through the event side by side, never quite touching, occasionally separating to greet others, then finding each other again as if by quiet agreement. Felt easy. That realization made Mitchell uneasy. Ease had not been part of her emotional vocabulary where Min-Jae was concerned. At one point, as they stood near a display of children's paintings, someone brushed past Mitchell too closely. She stumbled slightly. Min-Jae's hand came up instinctively, steadying her elbow. The contact was brief, light, necessary, and yet, something sparked. Not desire alone. Memory. Mitchell inhaled sharply and stepped back, creating space without looking at him. Min-Jae felt it immediately. The tension. The line. and something in him, old, impatient, entitled, rose suddenly. You're already here. You trust me enough to stand this close. Why are you still holding yourself back? The thought shocked him, because it sounded like the man he used to be. They stepped outside later, the cool night air a relief from the warmth inside. The city buzzed softly around them, distant and unconcerned. You okay? He asked. Yes, she said. Then, after a pause, I just needed air. They stood at the railing, shoulder to shoulder but not touching. This was the moment. Min-Jae felt it clearly. The opening. The temptation. He could say something meaningful, something emotional, something heavy. He could reach for her hand and let the night do the rest. He could frame vulnerability as sincerity and urgency as honesty. And part of him wanted to, badly, because restraint was exhausting, because he missed her, because he wanted to be close, because he wanted something now. His fingers flexed at his side. Mitchell sensed the shift, not in his movement but in the air itself. She turned slightly, wary without knowing why. Min-Jae. He looked at her, and stopped, completely. I'm going to say this carefully, he said, his voice lower but controlled. And then I'm going to stop talking. Her heart thudded. I want you, he continued, but not in a way that costs you peace. And not in a moment that makes you feel cornered. She searched his face, bracing for pressure. None came. If tonight is just tonight, he said, then that's enough. I won't take more than you're ready to give, even if part of me wants to. Silence fell between them. Not heavy. Sacred. Mitchell swallowed. That's hard to say, she admitted quietly. It's harder to live, he replied. But I'm learning. They stood there a few minutes longer, the city breathing around them. Then Mitchell spoke. Soft, honest, unguarded in a way she hadn't planned. Thank you for stopping. Min-Jae nodded once. Thank you for noticing. He walked her to her car later. No lingering. No attempt to extend the night. When she reached for the door, she hesitated. I don't regret coming, she said. He met her gaze. Neither do I. She opened the door, then paused again. This time she looked at him fully. You didn't fail tonight, she said. Min-Jae exhaled slowly. That matters more than you know. She got into the car and drove away, heart racing. Not from what happened, but from what didn't. Later, alone in her apartment, Mitchell leaned against the door, eyes closed. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel it without judgment. Not love, not surrender, but something fragile and frightening all the same. Safety. Across the city, Min-Jae sat on his balcony, hands clasped, staring at nothing. He had almost crossed the line. And for the first time in his life, he was proud that he hadn't. Mitchell did not sleep well that night. Not because of guilt, not because of regret, but because something had shifted, and she didn't yet know how to name it. She replayed the evening in fragments. The fundraiser, the cool air outside, the moment Min-Jae stopped himself without being asked. The restraint hadn't felt performative. It had felt costly. That mattered. Because restraint that cost nothing meant nothing. The next morning, Mitchell woke earlier than usual. She sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold, staring at her phone without touching it. She wasn't debating whether to reach out. She was debating why. Did she want reassurance? Validation? Control? Or did she simply want to acknowledge something real? Mitchell had spent her life being careful not to confuse gratitude with affection, safety with surrender. She knew the danger of giving more than she meant to, especially to a man who once held power over her vulnerability. But this would not be that. This would be her choice. After nearly an hour, she unlocked her phone and typed, "Last night mattered to me. I wanted you to know that." She stared at the screen, then sent it. Min-Jae read the message once, then again. He didn't respond immediately, not because he didn't want to, but because he understood the weight of what she had just offered. This wasn't flirtation. It wasn't invitation. It was acknowledgement. The first thing she had given him that was unguarded and freely chosen. He waited, then typed carefully, "Thank you for trusting me with that." I won't take it lightly. No emojis. No warmth layered with expectation. Just respect. Mitchell felt her chest loosen when she read it. She hadn't realized how tense she'd been until that moment. Days passed. Something between them changed, not in intensity, but in texture. Their conversations grew slightly deeper, though still restrained. Mitchell spoke more about her mother, little details she rarely shared. Min-Jae listened without interruption, without trying to turn grief into connection. Once, she laughed unexpectedly during a story and paused, surprised by herself. I don't usually talk about her, she said. I know, he replied. Thank you for letting me hear her through you. The words stayed with her long after the call ended. The real step came unexpectedly. Mitchell had a difficult day, one of those quiet collapses where nothing dramatic happened, yet everything felt heavy. She found herself sitting in her car long after arriving home, engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel. Without thinking too much, she picked up her phone. Not to vent, not to seek comfort, just to be seen. Today was harder than I expected. She almost deleted it. Then she sent it. Min-Jae replied a few minutes later. Do you want to talk about it? Or would you rather not be alone? The question startled her. Not I'm here. Not tell me everything. Choice. She leaned back in her seat, eyes closing briefly. I don't want advice. I just don't want to feel invisible tonight. His reply came gently. Then I'm here. No fixing. No questions unless you ask. That was when something in her chest gave way. Not broke. Opened. They stayed on the phone for nearly an hour. Not talking about trauma. Not revisiting the past. They spoke about nothing, music, books, small absurdities from their days. The rhythm was easy, unforced. When silence came, it wasn't rushed away. At one point, Mitchell said softly, You're different when you don't try to lead. Min-Jae smiled to himself. I'm different when I don't try to win. She felt warmth bloom. Not desire, not romance. Connection. When they finally hung up, Mitchell sat in the quiet of her apartment, aware of something new. She had let him into her emotional space. Not her body, not her future, but her present. And that was not something she gave casually. Min-Jae did not celebrate. He did not assume. He simply acknowledged what had been offered and held it carefully. That night, as he prepared for bed, he understood something with startling clarity. Mitchell Adebayo was not slowly giving in. She was slowly choosing. And choice, when freely given, was infinitely more powerful than possession ever had been. Across the city, Mitchell lay awake. Not restless this time. Calm. She was still afraid. Still cautious. But for the first time, she did not regret letting him closer. And that, she knew, was the most dangerous and hopeful step she had taken yet. The opportunity came disguised as convenience. Those were always the most dangerous ones. Min-Jae sat at the head of the conference table as his legal team finished outlining the situation. One final document tied to Samuel Davenport's recovery package. It was routine, almost forgettable. A technical clause. A future contingency. A clause that would bind Mitchell. Not legally. Emotionally. If Miss Davenport signs, one of the attorneys said, tapping the page, it streamlines oversight. Gives Kang global discretion if complications arise later. Min-Jae's gaze sharpened. Discretion over what? Her father's remaining assets, the man replied. Nothing aggressive. Just control. Control. The word echoed unpleasantly. The room was quiet, waiting. Does she know this is here? Min-Jae asked. The attorney hesitated. She would assume it's procedural. Given your relationship, I doubt. My relationship? Min-Jae interrupted calmly. The man cleared his throat. Given your rapport, she likely wouldn't question it. Min-Jae leaned back slowly, fingers steepled. This was the moment. Mitchell trusted him now just enough. She had allowed him into her emotional space, allowed his presence when she felt small, allowed honesty without armor. If he presented this document casually, she would sign. Not because she was naive, but because she believed him. The realization turned his stomach. Leave this with me, Min-Jae said. The lawyers exchanged glances but complied. When the room emptied, Min-Jae remained seated, staring at the document as if it might accuse him aloud. He imagined Mitchell's expression if she knew. Not anger, disappointment, the kind that closes doors forever. Mitchell arrived that evening expecting nothing unusual. Min-Jae had asked if she could stop by. Said he had paperwork related to her father, nothing urgent. His tone had been neutral, his message brief. Still, she felt the familiar tightening in her chest as she entered his office. Not fear. Memory. Min-Jae noticed immediately. "You don't have to stay," he said, rising from his desk. "We can do this another time." She shook her head. "It's fine." They sat across from each other, the table wide, the distance intentional. He slid the document toward her. "Before you read anything," he said carefully, "I need to tell you something." That alone made her look up. "I was advised to include a clause that would give my company leverage over your father's assets if future complications arise," he continued. Her brows furrowed. "Leverage?" "Yes." Silence stretched. "And?" she asked. "And if I were the man I used to be," Min-Jae said quietly, "I wouldn't tell you this part." Her fingers stilled. "You'd sign," he continued. "Not because you didn't read it, but because you trust me enough not to look for harm." Mitchell felt a chill move through her. "And you're telling me now because?" she asked. "Because I won't take anything from you that relies on trust one didn't earn honestly." He reached forward and turned the document toward himself. "That clause is gone," he said. "You'll see it crossed out, initialed, removed." Mitchell didn't look at the paper. She looked at him. Something inside her shifted. Not warmth, not relief. Gravity. "You didn't have to tell me," she said slowly. "I did," he replied. "Because if I ever benefit from your trust without your consent, then I haven't changed at all." Her throat tightened unexpectedly. This wasn't romance. This was ethics. And it mattered more. Mitchell stood, pacing once before stopping near the window. "This is what scares me," she admitted, not turning around. Min-Jae didn't speak. "The fact that you could have done it," she continued. "That power still exists." "Yes," he said softly. "It always will." She turned then, eyes sharp. "So why didn't you?" He met her gaze steadily. "Because the cost would have been you, and I don't want anything that requires your blindness." Silence fell heavy and real. Mitchell returned to the table slowly, picked up the document, and read it carefully this time. When she finished, she didn't sign immediately. She looked up. "This," she said, tapping the page lightly, "doesn't make you safe. I know, but it makes you trustworthy." Min-Jae inhaled quietly. "That matters to me," she added. She signed. Not because she owed him, but because she chose to. Afterward, they stood near the door, again no touch, no assumption. "I need you to understand something," Mitchell said. "I'm listening. If you ever use your power over me again," she continued, "this ends. Completely." "I wouldn't survive that," he said honestly. She studied him. "Good," she replied. "Then don't risk it." That night, Mitchell lay awake replaying the moment. Not the words. The choice. Min-Jae had been handed an opening, quiet, clean, justifiable. And he had closed it himself. For the first time since everything began, Mitchell allowed herself to think a dangerous thought. This man might actually be safe. Across the city, Min-Jae stood at his window, city lights reflected in glass. He felt no triumph, only clarity. Power was easy. Integrity was costly. And he had chosen integrity, knowing it might never be rewarded. For the first time, that choice felt like love. Mitchell did not thank him. Not aloud. Not that night. Not the next day. She signed the document, gathered her things, and left Min-Jae's office with the same composure she had arrived with. Her expression was calm, unreadable, as if nothing significant had occurred. Min-Jae watched her go without asking for acknowledgement. He had learned better. But alone. Away from him, away from the city, away from expectation. Mitchell felt it. The shift. It wasn't relief. It wasn't happiness. It was something quieter. Certainty. She replayed the moment again. Not the conversation, not the words, but the choice. The fact that Min-Jae had exposed a path he could have taken and then deliberately sealed it off himself. He hadn't been caught. He had confessed. And that mattered more than any apology ever could. Mitchell leaned against the kitchen counter, arms folded tightly across her chest, staring at nothing. Her mind moved slowly, deliberately, as if afraid to disturb the truth forming beneath her thoughts. He didn't need to tell me. The realization landed heavier than she expected. She had lived long enough to know how rare that was. Trust, Mitchell understood, was not built by grand gestures. It was built by the absence of exploitation, by the moments where someone could take advantage and didn't. She poured herself a glass of water she didn't drink, pacing once before stopping by the window. Below, the city continued on, unaware, indifferent. Her reflection stared back at her. "You're still careful," she whispered to herself, and that was good. She would remain careful. But something had softened. Not her boundaries, not her standards, her resistance. The next time she saw Min-Jae, she didn't bring it up. They met for coffee, brief, neutral, ordinary. He didn't search her face for reaction, didn't ask if she had thought about it, didn't attempt to draw meaning from her silence. He treated her exactly the same, and that consistency confirmed what she already knew. This hadn't been strategy. It had been principle. Mitchell noticed herself doing something new. She listened differently. When Min-Jae spoke, she no longer waited for subtext. She no longer braced for hidden leverage. She allowed his words to exist as they were, not as potential threats. Once, as he spoke about restructuring a department to protect junior employees, she caught herself smiling. Not outwardly, not noticeably. Internally. She didn't correct it. That night, Mitchell took out a journal she hadn't opened in years. She didn't write about Min-Jae directly. She wrote about power, about what it meant to hold it, about how it could be used quietly, about how safety wasn't the absence of danger, but the presence of choice. At the bottom of the page, she wrote one sentence and stared at it for a long time. Trust does not rush. It reveals itself. She closed the journal. Min-Jae sensed the difference even without her saying anything. It showed in the way she stayed a little longer during conversations, in the way she didn't immediately pull back when silence fell, in the way she met his gaze more directly, without challenge, without defense. He did not mistake it for surrender. He knew better. This was allowance. And allowance was fragile. One evening, as they parted outside her building, Mitchell paused. Not long, just long enough. Min-Jae waited. She didn't speak, but her eyes held his for a fraction longer than before. Steady, thoughtful, unguarded. Then she nodded once and turned away. Min-Jae exhaled slowly. That nod meant more than any confession ever could. Later, alone in her apartment, Mitchell stood by the mirror, studying her own expression. She wasn't in love. Not yet. But she could no longer deny the truth forming quietly inside her. Min-Jae Kang had crossed a line, and instead of taking advantage, he had stepped back. That didn't make him redeemed, but it made him possible. And that realization, unspoken, unshared, entirely her own, was the most powerful thing she had given him yet. Min-Jae noticed it in the pauses. Not the long ones, the silences Mitchell had always claimed as her own, but the brief hesitations where she could leave and didn't. It was subtle. The way she lingered after conversations had reached their natural end. The way she no longer angled her body away instinctively. The way her eyes softened. Not often, not dramatically, but enough that he felt it. Something in her had shifted, and he did not name it, because naming had always been his way of controlling. They were at a small evening lecture, something Mitchell had suggested casually weeks earlier. Nothing romantic. Nothing intentional, just a shared interest. Afterward, people filtered out slowly, conversations folding into clusters. Min-Jae gathered his coat, fully prepared to walk her to her car and part ways as usual. Mitchell didn't move. Instead, she stood beside him, arms loosely crossed, gaze thoughtful. That was better than I expected. she said. It was, he agreed. Another pause. Min-Jae waited. Not expectantly, not hopefully, just open. I have time, she added almost absently. If you want coffee. There it was. Not an invitation layered with meaning. Not a step forward wrapped in explanation. Just time. Min-Jae felt the instinct rise, to take, to advance, to anchor the moment. He let it pass. I'd like that, he said simply. They sat across from each other in a quiet cafe, the hour late enough that the noise had softened into background hum. Mitchell stirred her drink slowly, eyes on the cup, then glanced up at him. You've been different lately, she said. He smiled faintly. I was hoping you wouldn't notice. She almost smiled back. Almost. You're lighter, she continued. Not trying so hard. Min-Jae considered his response carefully. That's because I stopped trying to arrive somewhere, he said. I'm just here. Mitchell nodded, as if that confirmed something she had already decided. He sensed it then, not certainty, not surrender, but movement. Like a door that had been unlatched, even if it wasn't open. And instead of stepping toward it, he stepped back. When the night ended, Min-Jae did something unexpected. He didn't walk her home. I'm going to head this way, he said, gesturing down the street. But thank you for the coffee. Mitchell blinked, surprised. Oh, okay. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across her face. Not disappointment, awareness. I'll see you, she said. Yes, he replied. Whenever you choose. He turned and walked away without looking back. Mitchell stood there longer than she meant to. She had expected, without realizing it, that he would stay, that he would stretch the night, ask for more, test the space she had allowed. He hadn't, and that unsettled her deeply, because it meant something she had been avoiding was now undeniable. Min-Jae Kang was no longer orbiting her. He was standing on his own. That night, Mitchell lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She felt the absence of him more sharply than his presence. Not loneliness, not regret, but consequence. For the first time, she understood that trust did not only make room for closeness. It also made room for loss. If she did nothing, said nothing, he would not chase. And that frightened her more than any demand ever could have. Across the city, Min-Jae walked home alone, hands in his coat pockets, breathing steady. He felt it too. The shift, the way she had stayed, the way she had invited, the way she had looked at him as if measuring something real. He did not reach for his phone, did not replay the night, did not plan the next move. Letting go, he realized, was not abandonment. It was respect. And if Mitchell chose him one day, it would be because she stepped forward, not because he pulled. Somewhere between that night and the next, the story tilted quietly toward its end. Not with declarations, not with urgency, but with two people standing on opposite sides of the same truth. That what was growing between them could only survive if it remained free. And for the first time since they met, both of them were brave enough to allow that risk. Mitchell did not decide all at once. There was no single moment of clarity, no dramatic realization that rearranged the world. Instead, certainty arrived the way dawn did, slow, unavoidable, visible only once it had already happened. She noticed it in the quiet mornings when she reached for her phone without thinking and paused. Not because she was afraid to text Min-Jae, but because she no longer needed to rehearse what she would say. She noticed it in the way she no longer flinched when his name came up in conversation. In the way his presence felt steady, not disruptive. In the way trust had settled into her life like something that had always belonged there. And she noticed it most clearly in his absence. Because Min-Jae had stepped back. Not coldly, not resentfully, but fully. He still answered when she reached out. Still showed up when invited. Still listened with the same careful attention. But he no longer lingered at the edges of her life, waiting for permission she hadn't given. He had let go. And that was when Mitchell understood the truth she had been circling for weeks. If she did not move now, she would lose something she had chosen not to name, but had already accepted. The evening she decided to close the distance was unremarkable. No special date. No emotional trigger. Just a quiet Tuesday, rain tapping gently against her windows. The city softened into reflection and shadow. Mitchell stood in her kitchen, staring at her phone, feeling none of the panic she once associated with choice. Her heart was steady, her mind clear. She typed, "Can I see you tonight?" The reply came a few minutes later. "Yes, of course." No questions. No assumptions. Min-Jae opened the door wearing a simple sweater and slacks, hair still damp from a recent shower. He looked surprised to see her there, not because she had come, but because she had come unannounced. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she replied. He stepped aside without comment, letting her enter. They stood in the living room for a moment, neither of them moving to sit. The silence between them was not heavy, it was expectant. Mitchell took a breath. "I won't stay long," she said. "But I needed to say something in person." Min-Jae nodded once. "I'm listening." She didn't rush. She had learned the value of pacing her truth. "I know you stepped back," she continued, "and I understand why. I respect it." He said nothing. "But I need you to know," she added quietly, "that your restraint didn't make you disappear. It made you visible." His chest tightened. She met his gaze, steady and unguarded. "I'm not ready for promises," she said, "and I won't offer certainty I can't sustain." "I wouldn't accept it," he replied softly. A corner of her mouth lifted. "I know," she said. "That's why I'm here." She stepped closer. Not abruptly, not tentatively, deliberately. Min-Jae did not move. He waited just as he always had. "I choose you," Mitchell said. "Not dramatically, not loudly. Not because I owe you. Not because of what you did for my father. Not even because of what you've become." She paused, letting the words settle. "I choose you because you gave me space to choose at all." For the first time since they met, Min-Jae did not hold himself still. He exhaled, slowly. "I don't need more than that," he said. "I never did." They sat together on the couch later, close but not touching at first, the rain painting quiet patterns against the glass. Conversation drifted easily, unforced, unimportant, real. At some point, Mitchell rested her head against his shoulder. Not as a test, not as a question, as a decision. Min-Jae did not wrap his arm around her immediately. He waited. When she shifted slightly closer, he responded, gently, securely, without urgency. There was no claim in the gesture, only presence. They did not define what they were that night. They did not need to. Some things did not require labels to exist fully. What mattered was this. There was no debt between them, no leverage, no fear disguised as desire. Just two people choosing to remain without force, without haste. Later, when Mitchell stood to leave, Min-Jae walked her to the door. "I'll see you," she said. "Yes," he replied. "When you want." She smiled fully this time. Soon. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city breathed quietly, unaware of the small, profound thing that had just settled into place. Mitchell walked home with steady steps, not replaying the night, not questioning herself. For the first time in a long while, her heart felt neither guarded nor exposed. Felt aligned. Inside his apartment, Min-Jae stood for a moment after closing the door, hand resting against the wood. He did not feel victorious. He felt grounded. Love, he realized, was not about pursuit or possession. It was about being chosen, without coercion, without debt, without fear. And that night, Mitchell Davenport had chosen him. Quietly, freely, completely. The story did not end there. It never truly did. But it had arrived at something rare. A place where power no longer mattered. Where trust had outgrown fear. Where love did not need to announce itself to be real. Time did not change them dramatically. It refined them. Mitchell and Min-Jae did not rush into definitions or public declarations. They learned each other in the spaces between obligations, in shared mornings, in unplanned dinners, in conversations that stretched without effort. There were no promises spoken too early, only consistency. Min-Jae never returned to leverage. Whatever power he held remained where it belonged, outside the space they shared. And Mitchell never felt the need to guard herself the way she once had. Trust, once earned, did not need to be defended. They moved forward quietly, not as a spectacle, not as a story to be explained, but as two people who had chosen one another without pressure, without debt, without fear. And if anyone asked when it began, neither of them could say for certain. Because love, they learned, did not always arrive as an event. Sometimes it simply stayed. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, leave us a comment. Also share and subscribe to our channel, and click on the notification bell to get notified whenever a new story is made.